So, the sort of, is there an antecedent way of getting at one's responsibility? Because the self-empathy might itself not facilitate that, right? You don't know, independent of knowing whether you're right or wrong, whether you should be harder or softer on yourself. So that's quite fair. I was thinking of mostly cases where, almost to the point, and could be just lottery here, individuals speak of cases where their culpability is quite minimal, and yet they have these nagging self-reproaches. And so I was leaning on the side where they're pretty convinced already that they haven't done, they're sort of convinced, but not fully. And so they need a little bit of a push. Of just the sort, by the way, that doesn't typically come from crappy counselors, because it's usually, you didn't do anything wrong, get over it, move on. I mean, it's really dismissive of the moral terrain, and that's partly to whom this, not this audience, but it is a worry that I'm voicing. But you're quite right in the case of real perplexity and coming out on the wrong side of needing, the self-empathy itself is not going to give you independent footing to answer that question. Yeah. And similarly, the Stoic sage, not knowing whether it's good or not, because you should be feeling more of the wound that needs to be, where there's real wrongdoing, that the wound is a manifestation of, or not. So, yeah, not the only tool for moral puzzling, but one of them. Jus ad bellum versus jus in bello. You are very right. Despite all the work that this group has done, I think soldiers, by and large, do not take on the serious reflection about the causes, but rather about the in bello issues. Certainly, we know from Vietnam, where the causes were taken on very seriously, what the injuries looked like. And I've interviewed lots of Vietnam veterans for whom it doesn't go away easily. And I suspect we will see more of that later in the case of these wars. But certainly some have spoken to me about very powerful words, being succored. I've heard that word many times, being succored. And then there's sublimated ways of dealing with it, which is essentially I have a smaller ad bellum goal, and that's called bringing my guys home. I think, and those are the main ones I think that I covered. Yeah, so happy to open the floor and do my best to. I think I'll go this side or back and forth. Do you see someone who I haven't? Oh, yes, and I'm sorry, I don't know your name back there, please. Yes. If you keep those, just before you begin, if you could just keep your hands up, I see you. Yep.
Right next to.
Oh, those two are right there. Yeah, thank you very much.
So I'd like to talk very much, and I had a comment and a question. The comment is on the surface a critical one, but I think it shouldn't be deeply critical. And that is with the concept of self-empathy. I think the concept of self-empathy, or the term, seems to me extremely useful. And you've done a lot to point to the value of adopting an empathic attitude towards oneself. But it seems to me that the concept of self-empathy really isn't a separate concept from empathy. Uh-huh. And I mean, you can distinguish alter empathy and self-empathy, but it's just empathy. And part of what you're talking about is the value of adopting an empathic attitude towards yourself as opposed to adopting a specific attitude of self-empathy. So that's a small kind of quibble. Mm-hmm. I also think you do a good job of bringing out ways in which adopting an attitude of empathy towards oneself can be therapeutic generally, and that seems right. My question has to do with the way in which you think that empathy figures in the self-transformation of moral injury. And I see how empathy provides a general affective tool for therapeutic transformation generally. So it doesn't matter so much what your problem is. Whatever it is, empathy is going to help. And so if the problem is moral injury, it's going to help too. But the question is it that empathy provides this all-purpose state for transformation and recovery, or is it that there's something specific about empathy that's directed to the moral injury?
Mm-hmm. That's good. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
Hartman.
Michael Hartman, thank you very much. First of all, yes, regarding the first one, whether the object is self or other, I think that probably it's similar. I haven't sort of, or it's the same kind of attitude directed differentially. But it's never really raised. Self-esteem is talked about. And it seemed to me that part of what I was trying to get at and why I was thinking about it was because as a counter to dissociation, that one wants to still, seems to me, one wants still to be able to access to some degree deep hurts, and to be able to access them in a way that doesn't necessarily re-traumatize. Whether it has to be moral or whether those hurts could be the kind that come from helplessness in typical post-traumatic stress, fear, survival, threat where your life is threatened. I'm not, it may be sort of relevant in this regard. I think the therapists certainly find that the kind of desensitization or deconditioning of conditional fear, which often is part of getting rid of post-traumatic stress, that technique does not work at all in moral injury cases. Go over and over and over again the feeling of guilt or the situation that brought the guilt. You're not going to get very enlightened about it in the way that you may detoxify a little bit some of the fear. And so I'm looking for something that opens up a little bit more possibility in exploration and cognitive understanding than some sort of exposure therapy does.
So just on that point, I think you are bringing out something really valuable and distinctive. And the term self-empathy is useful because it brings out an aspect of empathy that may not be recognized. But the concept that you're working with and saying is really important here is just empathy.
To be able, yes, Einfühlung or empathy, I think actually it may even appear in Aristotle. I think I've seen some examples of the Greek word. To feel with, to someone, that kind of thing. But what I went, this is only one part of other kinds of reparative attitudes that I just haven't begun to adequately explore. I use the word hope in, where you have some kind of anticipatory attitude that those who have previously violated norms for which you feel like, now I'm thinking where hope in comes after resentment, but it doesn't have to come that way, where you feel deep resentment by violations, dignitary violations or the like, or betrayals, a commander's betrayal, a country's betrayal, a president's betrayal, the public, us, who don't go to war and send other people. I'm often feeling other people's resentment. That one answer, the RSVP to feeling resentment, Margaret Walker's, but Steve Darwell sort of says similar things in the second personal attitudes is, let me have hope in you. Allow me to trust you, or something like that. And so I think self-empathy is one piece of a larger puzzle of a lot of attitudes about holding people accountable, holding yourself accountable, finding ways of understanding your accountability as well that are part of repair. Oh, I'm sorry, yes, right next. It's, you're right there. Mhm. Thank you.
So you talked about empathy. First, self-empathy is modeled on sort of second personal empathy. You talked about, either you imitate the empathy that someone else has toward you, or you imitate your own empathy towards someone else. I guess I was curious what you think the prospects are for self-empathy without going through the second personal route first. Can you do it for yourself without imitating?
I don't know. I mean, I am a great, I am Aristotelian through and through, so we are politicae creatures, and and so I think holding a mirror up to yourself, so to speak, really can be navel gazing or narcissism. I'm not, and I, worried a little bit about thinking about this I didn't mean it to be in exclusion of, it was exploring an alternative in a large palette. I can't, it's hard for me to imagine cases where you aren't, in practice, learning about yourself by how you conduct yourself with respect to others in parenting and friendship, and how others conduct them and come to know you, vice versa. So I didn't mean it to be an either or. I just meant to explore the lesser explored possibility. I also think, there's a lot of success from journaling and diary writing and the like, and whether you need the transference of a therapist, not clear to me that that's fully necessary, but there are alternative methods. I don't know. I don't mean to put one in exclusion of another. Oh, so I'm in charge, right? I'm sharing my own show here. So I have, I'll go this way and then that way. So Adel, wherever you are, there you are.
Thanks. So I guess the background question is, should our goal be to help people have warranted or justified emotions, or should our goal be to help people have functional, livable emotions? So in the case of somebody who's culpably killed innocent people, the warranted emotion may be crushing guilt.
Yeah.
But that might not be functional. It may be totally debilitating and something that they can't get over. And so as a background question, I'm just wondering what your view is about that and how to kind of handle that. Some people ask, if you could give someone a pill that would remove their memories of the wrongful act.
We're about there.
Right. And the idea is, well, they're not in the military anymore. They'll never be in a position to do this ever again. And so this way they just won't have to live with the memory or with the guilt, and that'll help them live productive lives. Should we do that, or is it better that they have the emotions that they have reason to have? So that's sort of the background question.
Good.
And then the more specific one is it really true that we shouldn't feel guilt or regret, at least I think Williams called it agent regret, over very serious harms for which we're responsible but not culpable? He gives the example of the child who jumps out into the street and you hit him with your car, and there's no way you could have avoided him or anticipated, but you feel awful. And it seems to me that there's something there, that if somebody didn't have that reaction, if they thought, I've reasoned it through, and yes, I killed them, but I wasn't at fault, I've fully excused, not negligent, so I'm just going to move on with my day.
Good.
Is that really a healthy attitude to have?
Good, thank you very much. So generally, I guess I'm in favor of warranted, apt feelings rather than therapeutically livable or ones. Obviously, there are cases and cases where you can imagine a little deception goes a long way, or a little self-delusion goes a long way. And I'm generally in favor of there being ways to live with your warranted, justified guilt. An interesting case I was reading recently, Jean Emery. So he's the Primo Levi survivor who commits suicide too. Austrian, but takes on a French name. He lives in France. At any rate, he's philosophically minded, and he was a Nietzschean, and really sort of talks a lot about ressentiment. And in his case, he thinks that that there are certain kinds of crimes committed against one. In his case, the way in which he was beat for 2 years with a metal shovel by this particular torturer were such that he would never get rid of the resentment. It was apt. It was a grudge worth holding. It wasn't the servile grudge of, well, certainly he's not Nietzsche. It wasn't the servile grudge of Nietzsche. And that it wasn't functional for him either. And he committed suicide. And it would have been therapeutic in a way if he let it go. But he couldn't. He thought it would be to lose his humanity and to continue. And he actually spoke on South Germany on radio a lot about. There were programs in which he broadcasted his views, and it was part of sort of the Germany move on, time to move on. And he said no, and not that he was devising it for everyone, although he was taking something of a political stance, but it was really in his own case about why the burden couldn't be lifted. And so there's a case which, I can understand how he would think it was apt and warranted and totally dysfunctional for him at some point. But he thought it was functional in a political sense in a certain way. Agent regret. Agent regret's complicated. I've used guilt for some of these accident cases that others might use regret, because I find agent regret, regret to my ears is still too much like regret that it's raining, and as opposed to some implication. Agent doesn't carry enough weight for me to carry the feeling. It's also not that's just my ears. I don't think what I heard as I listened to and I use the word soldiers for all the service members. I don't think if I said regret to them, or even, hey, there's this philosophical coinage out there called agent regret, I just think it wouldn't come close to phenomenologically capturing what they're feeling. Subjective guilt, doesn't quite track, or we don't know if it tracks aptly. And then I think, but there is a reason to, even when it doesn't track aptly, or you're not quite sure, I think there's a reason. You could go on it, sort of thinking of some of the Justin Darm's Jacobson literature about aptness and evaluative attitudes and aptness. I think even if it's not rational, or Rawls used to say proper guilt, it still could be reasonable. That's sort of, it shows you're not callous. It's morally reasonable, not just understandable. But I think a lot of what soldiers feel is that the guilt they feel isn't just not just. It may not be rationally apt, but it's showing their troops and themselves that they're not. It's mixed with grief, that they feel it, and so it's what the morally admirable person would do. It's a kind of stand-in for something that is not specific as guilt. Rational guilt would be. Okay, I'm sorry. This side, I'm gonna Jeff, and so just so I have it, I think I have 3 more, and you can keep time for me. Dick, Matthias, is that how we? And Larry, is that? Yeah, good. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay, I wanted to suggest that what you may be describing here is not anything like one phenomenon, but a range of phenomena. And it seems to me that the label self-empathy is not a good label for any of them, given the etymology of the term. You say it means to feel with, or entering into someone's feelings. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me to think of feeling along with myself, or entering into my own feelings, or whatever, because I already got them. It seems like that's something you do with somebody else. But how do you do that with yourself? It's redundant. You've already got them. And what's more, if you can make sense out of this idea of somehow entering into your own feelings, that doesn't guarantee any particular type of attitude towards yourself that's going to emerge. You may come out of it with even greater self-loathing or something. So I wouldn't call it self-empathy. I think you're right to say it's not self-forgiveness. I think that's actually incoherent. like the idea that God can forgive you for something that you've done to somebody else. I think the idea that God can forgive you really logically just goes with the idea that the real individual who's been wronged by any of your wrongdoing is God, not your immediate victim, which is an idea that you do find in Christianity. The real sin is towards God, and all of that seems to me to be a terrible mistake. But I did just want to suggest that some of the a few of the candidates for the range of phenomena that you might have in mind here. One is that one could come to the knowledge. That is, it could what you might be describing in some cases is a recognition of or achievement of knowledge, the knowledge that you didn't do anything wrong, or that you made no mistaken choice at all. That's one option. Another is that you recognize that you did something wrong, but you come to understand that you had a good excuse for the way that you acted, in the way that you could find that somebody who has wronged you also has an excuse, and that changes your attitude a bit. Or it could be something like this, that you recognize that you did wrong, maybe you weren't fully excused, but you come to the realization that you've punished yourself enough through blaming yourself and making yourself miserable by revisiting this thing, and really it is time to move on, that there's a limit to the punishment that one might deserve to inflict upon oneself. And then finally, an attitude of compassion towards oneself, even if one isn't fully excused, in the same way that you can have this to others, or mercy towards yourself in a way that you might be merciful towards others. So the kind of range of phenomena here, and all of these seem to be distinct emotions, because they come with a different cognitive content.
Yeah, no, that's good. I certainly agree that, well, let me say why I chose empathy in addition to being asked to think about it for a different context. Because I actually think that often you aren't feeling these things enough. That is, that the guilt may be for something that you've done, but you believe you've done, or the guilt surrounds an incident in which you were implicated. But some of the actual feelings of what happened then, and the full range of affect isn't actually easily accessible to you. And so I'm looking for some term that allows for emotional access, the opposite of dissociating, which is very, very common in the face of all sorts of experiences in war, where there are losses, whether they then set off a sense of helplessness that comes with stress and post-traumatic stress, or a sense of injury. So that's one of the reasons I wanted that. So I'm not sure that it's just redundant. I actually think in some cases you're frozen. You can't feel the thing. So a beginning place was to feel some of the conflict and feel some of the pulls and the grief and the love and the sheer rage and all the other crap that comes with it. On the compassion, I certainly wanted, and the sense of getting to having some moment I talk about a sense that you've arrived at a kind of exculpatory, I can't get the word out, exculpatory, I think I've lost a syllable there, moment, and that is a kind of self-knowledge moment or self-recognition. But also the going light on your time to go light. There's been enough self-reproach, and we may have to leave things. This is sort of I don't know how to square that off with my response to Adel, but the guilt is apt, but you may not have to. But guilt can take different forms. It may not have to be as punishing or as unrelenting or as in your face or as depressive as it may be. But those are very helpful. Spend more time on them. Okay, so even lost my list here. I think I have two. I think I have. You're right there. Oh, I'm sorry. I have three people on the floor.
Yeah. interesting paper. This is a little bit of a ramble more than a question. So I apologize. So look, there's the general phenomenon of people, the moral injuries. There's something, an episode in the past that involves some mix of maybe luck and failure of agency, and that triggers feelings in the neighborhood of guilt and shame and so on. So for one feature here is to get a handle on the phenomenon. We don't want to just look at data from sort of therapy or people who are having real trouble with it. I mean, because presumably there'll be a range of cases. People come back from these experiences and experience a problem with, it's debilitating, it blocks future agency, and they don't, they do get them, they don't show up in the statistics, So we want sort of, for the phenomenon of moral injury and recovery, we want to look at the sort of the normal and the easy cases as well as the hard cases. And I think it's just that there's an intellectualist bias to think that, well, if you've got a problem and if you are stuck, going back and reliving the experience and being able to think about it and experience it fully and effectively and come to an appropriate intellectual judgment about exactly how responsible you are, and this will, sometimes, maybe, and maybe a lot of the time. But it seems to me, especially if I think of contexts which aren't so clearly, include, sort of, well, not just the therapy. I mean, so a non-war example. I mean, lifeguards, are scanning the beach. Right. They have to watch hundreds of people in the water, and they feel responsible. I mean, so they feel terrible and worse if somebody drowns, especially if there's an incident and several people drown. So I've been involved with somebody who's, there's a protocol where you have, something like a counseling session the next day. And some lifeguards want that, and some lifeguards don't want that. And it seems to me, you can give a case, this goes back to something you can give a case either way here. I mean, just another anecdote, I've heard lots of veterans of wars say, my father never came back from the Pacific or from Korea or something, and he never wanted to talk about it, and so, and it seems to me there's some evidence that can be functional for a lot, I don't want it, I want to just put it behind me. In the lifeguard case, you might think, well, look, we want to be able to have a barnstorming session where we, after this horrible incident, we talk about, well, we could do this, we could do that, we could have shorter work hours, we could, get better binoculars, and if people are focused on my guilt and my shame and how exactly, how much responsibility I should feel and what's the exactly warranted emotion, that can just get in the way of the problem solving and how can we do this better. So, and even in the traumatic cases, it just there'll be cases and cases. I at least want to be open to the idea that so empathy, feeling in a friendly way towards oneself. That doesn't necessarily go with self-awareness or going to the past and recovering the incident and owning it fully, right? It seems to me sometimes non-ownership. I'm just going to leave it behind. I don't know. Was I guilty? Was I not? I'm just going to leave it behind. I'm open. That may be connected with being able to get a sense of efficacy and a sense of being able to go on, and it may be connected with empathy in the sense of being able to feel for oneself now in a positive way, the way you feel well towards a friend, and feelings of sort of being a friend to oneself in the sense of maybe you want to be a friend to yourself, even if there's warranted guilt. I mean, it might be that even there's something maybe valuable about being a good friend to oneself, which might be involved giving oneself a break and not making harsh judgments of oneself, or not erring. If there's a gray area of judgment, you err on the side of giving yourself a more favorable rating. So the goal isn't to be friendly about oneself, and maybe in a way that connects with recovering a sense of efficacy. Doesn't necessarily. Its relation to self-awareness and self-knowledge and a correct moral appraisal of what one did in the past seems to be quite loose. And it may be that for some cases, maybe for every case of somebody who really collapsed and can't go forward, that the way forward has to involve the scenario that you're describing. But it seems empirically open, I would think. Well,
Yeah,
stop.
that's helpful, and uh, I didn't mean to suggest the only path or a necessary one. And certainly God knows there are a million ways of getting beyond war, from adventure parks to shooting ranges to re-enlist tomorrow to join, to all sorts of things that claim to be empowering and enabling and getting people back. It's just struck me, and and obviously I'm beginning with a biased sample, that and I'll make it brief because I have two more on the table here, there are often lots of nags that unsettle and color mood and become intrusive that would do well to be examined, and including the case of the laconic World War II GI, of which my father was one, and the case of many veterans in my classes who will only at the very, very end sort of you probably have this experience, reveal something that has been sitting on them for so long that really doesn't seem so horrific, but they're alive and that guy isn't, and it came out in 25 million different ways in class when they were describing their experience, but never quite in the way that exposed them to themselves and to the others about how they're really feeling about it in incriminating ways. So yeah, but I didn't mean to suggest it's the only or even necessarily empowering. I have two quick questions. Matthias, you help me.
Perhaps we could just take
Yeah.
the two questions one after the other.
Perfect.
And if we could make them quick, that'd
Thank
be
you.
great.
Try to be quick. Although I have two parts. The first is the first about, I'm still not quite clear what exactly the cognitive content of this process of self-empathy is. And I have two readings. I would just like to know which one is the correct one. So the first could be that the soldier, in going back to these emotions, in refeeling them, somehow cognitively accesses the right solution to the problem of whether he was responsible or not, so that this reliving would already have, within the feelings, there would be this cognitive content. I'm actually skeptical of that. I think it would rather be that one learns to accept that kind of ambivalence of fear, of perhaps guilt, and by being a little bit more relaxed and perhaps accepting that one is an ambiguous and problematic person, then you open up the possibility of then rather cognitively, intellectually facing these problems, what BJ was also referring to. But then I think one needs more of a differentiated notion, because with the cognitive thing, I would then say you have to go outward. So with the first example of
You have to go what?
Outward. So you cannot remain by yourself and asking these questions, what am I responsible? But you have to talk about just Atbildung. I was really, the person who felt betrayed by his government that they couldn't organize the death certificates, and he rather would have killed all these other people. It's amazing, I think. So then he would have to reflect on his responsibility in the context of that collective enterprise, and could only come up with, I think, an intellectually satisfying notion if you would also engage in social criticism in the end. So I think one would have to separate a little bit more the empathetic, get away with the blockages, and then the second step of cognitively being able to address these questions.
Thank you. Larry. I think the mic's on its way.
Right, so again, I'll try to be quick. So I think about these things in terms of the moral remainder that seems so important to all this. And some of it has to do with the moral remainder for the individual. There really is responsibility still there, even though you acted fairly well. But in some other cases, it seems to me it's a moral remainder that's broader than just for the individual. It's that the war had tragic results, and it's important for the society to remember that. And so I think about that in terms of the Vietnam War, for instance, that I think a lot of the folks who came back with this sense that they fought pointlessly or wrongly, that we shouldn't try to get them to be disabused of that in some ways, although I think it should be shared better so that those of us who stayed here should also feel, badly about what happened. And so what seems unfair is that just the folks who are coming back feel this, but rather all of us should. But it's also not clear to me that it's wrong for them to feel this, because it's perhaps important for the society to have this remainder. And so, like Jeff, I want to, and Matthias, I want this to be a bit more nuanced. In some cases, it looks like folks really were still responsible for more than they realized at the time, and that this will keep coming back in a way that could be good for them down the road. But in other cases, it may be that they did everything right themselves, but that it was a bad war. And most wars are tragic, and it's important for them, for the society to have that remainder there that's stuck in the consciousness somewhere.
Thank you for those. As I said, Matthias, it's not that this is a quick bullet for accessing the right answer. So, but I very much am thinking that there's both a sort of Socratic self-examination, you might say, and an engagement in larger social criticism, which some soldiers readily do, and others very reluctantly do. And Larry, yes, remainder certainly always is in the back of my thought, the moral residue here, and that and there are cases and cases. I'm giving cases that came before I meant were on my mind. I didn't mean to be at all comprehensive, and the how to think about collective, if I can use that word here, responsibility. I feel it often because I've been thinking about resentment, and I actually, it's not one that you really, it's not really almost PC to sort of think about soldiers' resentment. In veterans groups, so on, it doesn't really, it comes out a little bit. Thank you for your, I can't stand. Thank you for your service. Don't give me that again, or 10% discount at Home Depot. I don't want that. I mean, I get it. So I get it sometimes when I'm in conversations or in speaking engagements. But and sometimes you certainly get it. I think in blogs, we've in various blogs. But I don't think I don't know. I do think it's an unfairly distributed burden in all sorts of ways. I'm not sure conscription's the answer. But no war tax, so few. I said 2.4 million are coming home, but 0.5% or so have been serving for long 6-7 deployments. So it's very, very unbalanced in terms of who participated and who didn't. And as a result, I think we've only begun to see the resentment because, well, sequestration is upon us, and we will have all sorts of places where the budget is hitting, including those who need it for care and their families. So I'm going to leave it at that. And thank you again. Thank you so much for organizing this.
Thank you all for coming. It was a great conference. We enjoyed it immensely, and we hope to see some of you later.
Thank you. Thanks, Larry.